As our last topic, let's look at organizational liability and the management of digital forensics. So, organizational liability is an interesting concept. If an employee acts either with or without authorization and performs an illegal or unethical act, the organization can be held financially as well as legally responsible for that action. Therefore, it's important that whenever you're investigating something like this, you may need to make sure that your legal counsel is also involved in the process. An organization increases its liability if it refuses to take measures or due care to make sure that the employee knows what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, and the consequences of illegal or unethical actions, or just does nothing. If they know that an employee has broken a law or done something unethical but does nothing, then the organization can increase its liability. Due diligence requires that the organization make a valid and ongoing effort to protect others. Some of the key law enforcement agencies, well, first, everybody knows the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, but the FBI has a program called the InfraGard program, which is a juxtaposition of the FBI and academia and business in an organization that can promote efforts to educate, train, inform, and involve those sectors in information security. Each FBI field office has established an InfraGard chapter. We have one here in North Texas, for instance, that represents the North Texas area all the way from, I believe, like Amarillo across to Texarkana. But every office coordinates with that InfraGard group to help provide information about attacks, vulnerabilities, and threats. So it's important that you participate in something like that, the InfraGard, to be able to get access to a law enforcement agency that can help you in times of attack or times of criminal activity. The NSA is very specialized in protecting U.S. information, so it has systems and capability to produce foreign intelligence information. It has the responsibility for security communications and information systems at many of the federal government agencies that are associated with national security. They also, the Information Assurance Directorate, the IAD, provides information security solutions, standards, and techniques that you can use to provide a stronger cyber defense. You can go out to the NSA site and go to the Information Assurance Directive and get free information on how to protect your organization. In addition to its mission to protect members of the U.S. government, such as the presidency, the U.S. Secret Service also has an electronic crimes unit that helps in the assessment and forensics of computer fraud cases, false identification crimes, and even financial crimes. Secret Service was transferred from the Treasury to Homeland Security, but it has a very strong focus on criminal activity that relates to cyber crime. So they can be used also either in addition to the FBI or certainly a standalone organization to look at certain types of crimes. It's very difficult to delineate, do I call the FBI, do I call the Secret Service, but establish a relationship with both organizations, and you'll be able to determine which one is the best for your organization to contact if a crime occurs. Managing digital forensics is an important aspect of your job as a security professional. It's something though that has a very delicate element to it, and that is protecting the information that is evidence of the crime. How an organization actually is going to conduct its forensics is something that you need to think about long before you actually have to establish a forensic activity. You want to know the processes and who's going to be involved, etc. And we'll talk about that in a little more depth here. But in order to protect the organization and assist law enforcement, the CISO and other people in your organization must act to document what happened and how. It's very important when either a crime occurs or a breach occurs or whatever, begin documenting it in extreme detail so that you'll have that evidentiary trail as to what you've done, what you've touched, what you've looked at, etc. But forensics is the coherent application of methodical investigatory techniques to present evidence of crimes in court or court-like settings. It's an important point there. When you go to court, you have to prove that that evidence has not been tampered with, has not been modified, that is exactly what was on those systems. That's why a lot of times companies, especially if they know they're going to go to court, require that you use an outside forensic firm to process the forensics. So it's very important that you establish that relationship with an external firm long before you have to use them. But digital forensics involves the preservation, identification, extraction, documentation, and interpretation of digital media for evidentiary and/or root cause analysis. Again, have to be very well-defined methodologies, and tends to be as much an art as a science. It's a very intricate art to be a good forensics person. Evidentiary material can be a number of different things. It can be logs, it could be records that you've seen modified, it can be a number of different things, but it really doesn't become evidence until it's formally admitted as evidence by a judge or a ruling officer. But digital forensics can be used for two key purposes. One is to investigate allegations of digital malfeasance, a crime against or using digital media, computer technology, etc., or to perform root cause analysis. How did an incident occur? How did an attack become successful in our organization? So digital forensics can be used to examine that path and methodology and be able to understand how a crime had occurred. This is a very important point. Most organizations cannot sustain a permanent digital forensics team. Now, you may have people who are good at forensics. They understand the software, they understand how to acquire data and things like that. But unless they are well-trained, professionally trained digital forensics people, please use an outside service that specializes in doing this. The important thing about the acquisition of evidentiary material is that it cannot be modified, it can't be tainted, and it can't have an implication of taint. So one of the worst things you can do is go out and immediately start gathering things like log data and other things that might indicate a crime, unless you have a fear that that data might be destroyed. The fact that you gather the log data, though, when you take that to court, the defense attorney might argue that, how do I know you didn't change the data? So you got to be very careful. Doing acquisition of forensic data is a very precise art and something that should be practiced by only a qualified forensics individual. So before many organizations will allow, for instance, a law enforcement organization to come in and conduct an investigation, they're going to require a search warrant. And that there may need to be an affidavit taken. There may be other corporate paperwork that needs to be completed before you're going to allow that law enforcement organization to come into your company to gather data. So in digital forensics, all investigations follow basically the same methodology. You're going to identify relevant items of evidentiary value, acquire or seize the evidence without alteration or damage, take steps to assure that the evidence is at every step verifiably authentic and is unchanged from the time it was seized, analyze the data without risking modification or unauthorized access, and report the findings to the proper authority. Now, if you hire a firm to come in to do that, then they will maintain all of these steps. But if you do it yourself, then again, you need to be trained in how to acquire evidence without alteration or damage, how to verify each step that it's authentic, and how to be able to prepare that data to provide to a law enforcement agency. Some law enforcement agencies won't take the data if you've acquired it. So that's why you need that relationship up front with them. So here's sort of a flow chart that gives you kind of an idea. You have a violation of a crime, or a crime is detected. You have an affidavit seeking authorization to investigate. Investigation is authorized, say, by your legal team. If not, then you just archive the material and move on. If they do authorize the investigation, you start to collect the evidence. Now, a security incident may trigger the incident response process. And as part of that incident response process, you may already have some information that will pass into the evidentiary channel. So, for instance, documentation where they've recorded what they saw and when they saw, say, ransomware appear on a system. You collect that evidence, you analyze the evidence, produce a report, and then you archive it from there. Now, organizations that are going to develop digital forensics procedures will set up a number of policies. So, as it says here, EM, or the Evidentiary Material Policy, should specify who may conduct an investigation, who may authorize an investigation. Oftentimes that's the legal team. What affidavit-related documents are required, what search warrant-related documents are required, what digital media may be seized or taken offline, what methodology should be followed, what methods are required for the chain of custody or chain of evidence, and what format the final report should take and to whom it should be given. Again, all of this should be developed long before you need to execute this process. When the incident or disaster violates civil or criminal law, it's the organization's responsibility to notify the proper authorities. And I mean, if you think about the number of things that I've seen in crimes that have been committed inside of companies, everything from stealing intellectual property to collecting child pornography, I've seen in companies. And all of those have different ways that you have to notify law enforcement, and perhaps different ways that the company and law enforcement have to interact with each other. So again, you can see in here, you have the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you have U.S. Secret Service, Treasury Department, and you even have your own state and local authorities that may be that you may work with in some types of criminal activity. But then there's the question of, do I even call law enforcement? Some agencies are better equipped to process the evidence, but some agencies may come in and you really have no control over the process once they come in. Some companies worry about the public image if they have to call law enforcement in. And there's a possible issue if there's confiscation of vital equipment as evidence. Now, this generally doesn't happen with most professional law enforcement agencies. They can acquire the material without taking the equipment, but it's not always possible. So if a large portion of the equipment was used to commit a crime, then they may very well come in and take a large portion of that equipment. In summary, deterrence can prevent an illegal or unethical activity from occurring. It's very important that you work on that deterrent, and that can be done through education, policy, but making people aware of what is considered illegal and unethical in your organization. You need to really sponsor positive ethics. You can do this through professional organizations. You can do it again through education, but making sure people are aware of what the rules are that they'll operate with goes a long way. Laws are formally adopted rules for accepted behavior. Make sure you understand which rules apply to your organization, which laws apply to your organizations, and educate your people on those laws. You could formalize the desired behavior in documents called policies, but they must be distributed to everyone. They need to be read, understood, and explicitly agreed to by employees for them to be uniformly applied and enforced. Civil law encompasses a wide variety of laws that regulate relationships between and among individuals and organizations. Criminal law addresses crimes that harm society. And tort law is a subset of civil laws that deals with lawsuits by individuals rather than criminal prosecution by the state. U.S. copyright laws protect intellectual property rights of individuals that produce either written or art. A number of U.S. key federal agencies can help you should you need their assistance in an attack. Digital forensics involves the preservation, identification, extraction, documentation, and interpretation of computer media for evidentiary and root cause analysis. E-discovery is a process that we use for the identification and preservation of evidentiary materials, specifically if there's a legal action involving the company. Most organizations cannot sustain a permanent digital forensic team, so establish a relationship with an outside firm before you need them. And make sure that you have a process developed and policy developed for doing forensics long before you have to use that process.